Chapter 14. The girl entered the hotel and a moment later moved swiftly up the stairs. On the second floor, she checked the room numbers and knocked at a door. It swung back after a pause. "Why, good morning." Pat straightened swiftly, moving aside. "Come on in, Esther. No bad news, I hope." He left the door open as she entered and turned towards the bed. On it lay, outspread, the parts of a carbine and a Colt 6-gun which he had been thoroughly cleaning. "Nothing yet, Pat. Dad expects trouble at the ranch possibly today." She looked at the guns, constraint in her manner. "I hope you're not planning anything drastic." Going on with his work of assembling the guns, he might never have heard her. "Did Press go to mace Shoe over there as he had threatened?" he went on casually.
"No. 2 or 3 of the brush boys are at the ranch with Father. He sent them away in case of violence, should Conklin appear there."
Her voice tight now as she avoided his eye. "You mean he sent you here, to Castle Gate?" Pat persisted curiously.
"No, Pat."
Guard down at last, she turned towards him frankly.
"Dad sent me to the brush ranch, really, in Beaver Canyon. I'm afraid he thinks I'm there now, but with
Clay in jail, you figured you'd rather be here in town? Is that the truth?" he pressed home keenly. Her blush said that he had hit on the truth. She did not evade, and he respected her for that.
"I knew I'd find you here," she acknowledged with simple candor. "And perhaps it'd be even safer than in the cache."
He shook his head smilingly. "And now you're going to work on me, Esther. Safety isn't your first thought. I doubt very much if that's what you're expecting me to supply either."
"Isn't it?"
She looked both bothered and amused. "Nope." He was bolder now. "All the same, I'm glad you came. I was wondering how to kill a day without acting downright suspicious. I see you got riding duds on. Is your horse outside?" She signified that was the case. "Good." Pat slid his gun into its sheath and swept up his hat. "Wait till I get mine, and let's go for a ride." Puzzled as she was by this procedure, Esther assented without remark, but a half-hour later, jogging over the sage swells at his side, she glanced back at the village behind them where Clay Marble was still in jail.
"You aren't up to something, are you, Pat?"
she inquired, perplexity furrowing her brow.
"This isn't the way to Apache Cache, or anywhere else that I know of."
"It certainly isn't," he agreed firmly. "I said we'd take a ride, remember? Let's talk about something else. You, for instance." The trail they were taking led along Antelope Creek, a pretty stream that was winding down from the high mesas, and later they stopped at a pine-shaded nook for lunch that Pat had stuffed into his saddle pocket. Once satisfied that for this day she must mark time in her tangled personal affairs, Esther gave herself up to casual talk, and a pleasant companion she proved. By late afternoon, when they turned homeward, Pat knew her better than she would have deemed possible. After good-humoredly following a long conversation which returned again and again unerringly to Clay Marble, he understood accurately the source of her charm for that young man. Dusk was shading the range by the time they reached Castle Gate. The masculine consciousness of this town followed the girl up street, but, putting up their horses and seeking a secluded table at the Venetian, they were unmolested. Hungry as she was, Esther's eyes followed Pat's with puzzled regard. She could not fathom the object of this idly spent day, enjoyable as it might have been under more auspicious circumstances. Halfway through supper, she suddenly put down her fork.
"Aren't we going to go visit Clay?"
she brought out pleadingly. Pat raised a warning hand and cocked his ear. From beyond the window came the clatter of a madly driven horse pounding down the street. They saw the rider flash by. A man yelled to him. Indistinguishable words were called back and forth, and Pat saw a man running into the shadows, another, and a puncher jumping from a stool and hurried out from the restaurant. Esther was startled.
What is it, Pat?
Something's up. He rose almost briskly. Let's get out there. A nameless tension caught the girl up in its grip. She joined him without a word and hastened to the door. Some strong excitement was abroad, and they saw at once. Men were gathered in knots and groups, muttering to each other. Others hurried away to carry the news, whatever it was. Jake Starbuck stood on the porch of his store, and Pat accosted him. "What's all the fuss and feathers, Starbucks?" He did not attempt to mask his deep curiosity.
You haven't heard?
The rancher gave Esther a compassionate look.
Plum Bob moved in on your dad today, girl. Moved him out bag and baggage. I hear Windy Conklin was the ringleader. Your pa ain't been hurt near as I could tell.
Stunned by the blow which knocked at her heart, Esther was strongly conscious of her own sensations in that moment, and she saw Pat's lean face turn towards her, darkly intent. "Thanks, Starbuck," he grunted tensely. Taking the girl by the arm, he led her off. "With news of that kind going around town, this is our time, girl," he muttered, hurrying her pace. "Listen to what I say, and do not get rattled." Somehow she gathered the sense of his hurried whisper. She could only nod jerkily and turn away to hasten up the street alone. She got her own horse and Pat's in front of the restaurant and moved down a gloomy alley and threaded a back lane without attracting attention to herself. At the corner of a dark building she paused, glancing up blindly at the blazing stars, the look in her eyes a prayer. After a few minutes later, with hoofs thudding softly, Pat arrived leading a third horse. "Hurry," he urged. They left the horses there and moved on into the muffled darkness. A wall loomed up, and Esther recognized the rear of the bank building, and Sheriff Elmy's office was housed there, and the jail as well. "Hello, Elmy?" Pat's hail suddenly broke silence. A red spark glowing near the shadowed door abruptly lowered.
"Ferd ain't here. What are you after?"
a gruff voice said. Pat moved into the faint light. "The young lady here wants to talk to Marble for a few moments," he said easily. "No harm in that, I reckon."
"Well, I don't know." The guard sounded wary. Nothing was said about...
"Well, it won't take any time at all," Pat said confidently. "Who is it, Jack Marks? I'll stay here at the door with you, Marks, and watch." Head down, Esther brushed past the guard with a murmured word, and he touched his hat. A dim light burned in the empty office, and here, with Pat engaging the watchman in talk, her movements quickened. She darted to the sheriff's desk and looked about hurriedly, and then her hands sped to the ring suspended with the keys. Swiftly she turned towards the cell block.
"Clay."
The name was a bare whisper.
"Over here,"
he muttered tensely. She came to the grill. A key rasped, and he was forced to try a second. The iron door swung open.
"Come."
Taking his hand, she led him to the office, breathing a command for uttered silence, and backed him against the wall in the shadow of the outer door.
"Wait."
Her lips formed a warning. She stepped to the door and moved outside hesitantly.
"Did you say that Clay was in one of the cells, Mr. Marks?"
she faltered uncertainly.
"Because I don't see him. It's dark in there, and he's not answering."
Pat saw Marks stiffen.
"He's there, all right." His tone was gruff. "He can't be sleeping yet."
Shoving forward, he walked into the jail office, Pat and Esther at his back. Grabbing up the lamp, Marks raised the wick. The girl held her breath as he swung towards the cell block, but the guard sensed nothing, and she and Pat blocked the door behind him as he thrust inside, and only Pat caught the soft scrape of Clay's boots as the latter lunged to the outer door and faded into the darkness. Marks rattled the locked gate, holding his lamp up. "Hell, Marble! Hey, he's gone! There ain't nobody in here!" he yelped. They visibly shared his amazement, peering into the other cells.
Don't tell me you let a prisoner escape, ejected Pat. Helmy won't like this at all. Anybody been here before us, Marks? Ed Gurley was here, and Marble got his supper, the guard muttered. Dang it all, I was sure. He broke off, staring at them suspiciously. Wished I could be certain that one of yous had nothing to do with it, he blurted out belligerently. Pat frowned. Miss Moon, you mean? He rasped incredulously. She's a girl, Marks, and I was out there with you. His stiffness, so keenly conscious of unmerited injury, was superb. Well, if you feel that way, we'll move out. Come on, Esther. Marks was still sputtering his dumbfounded expressions when they moved out into the gloom. Clay was waiting for them beside the horses. That was good work, Stevens, he murmured tightly, swinging astride. Pat grunted. With all that excitement in town, a man could steal the jail in a pinch. Let's get going. Although the hue of cry of pursuit could not be long in coming, they confined themselves to a circumspect pace till Castle Gate lay well behind them. They hadn't been seen. Familiar with this range, Clay led the way through the night without hesitation. What now, Clay? Pat inquired finally. The answer was long in coming, but Marble's words were resolute. It's those 7-hook steers, Stevens. They're more important than ever now. If I'm forced to hide, and I've no choice there, I'll stay with it till I locate 'em, unless Sam and Ezra have turned up in the meantime, he added hopefully. Pat shook a negative. Ezra's in your boots, and don't forget, and Sam seems pretty sure I know what he's up to. Clay whirled on him. You mean you know where those steers are? He whipped out. Well, I think I could find them. Then what are we dragging our heels for? Did they take over the Axe Head today? Yes, they did, Marble. The news is spreading in town like wildfire. Clay groaned. Blocked every way I turn. He looked at Ezra. It's either ruin for your dad or heaven knows what for my own. What a choice for a man. For all we know, Doc might be dead by now, he forced out feverishly. Come on, Marble, get a hold of yourself, growled Pat. The smart play is to trace down those steers first and then see what can be done. This was the plan finally decided upon. They pulled up in the pines clothing a secluded hollow 12 miles from town. Here Pat risked a fire against the growing night chill while Esther rolled into her blanket. She slept while the men watched and talked. It was Pat's idea that the elusive 7-hook herd would be found somewhere in Apache cache. Well, it must be there, he argued. The cache is the only country and mile that the Plum Bob riders haven't combed over and over. Those Mormon ranches are a natural barrier, and you can bet that Ezra and Sam didn't overlook that. Can we get through there? Well, I think that Esther's is our passport, Pat nodded. They all know her, but maybe we can filter in without an uproar anyway. That's what we'll try. Having got what rest they could before dawn spread in the eastern sky, they were ready to push on. Esther, I want the layout of the cache, Pat said. With a twig, she drew a map in the dust, much resembling a human hand, with Axehead Canyon represented by the thumb and the other canyons branching away from the cache, proper like outstretched fingers. Pat insisted on learning the names of the Mormon families inhabiting those canyon homes. Mace Schoonover occupied the easternmost, and he headed up the Mormons, and the girl characterized him as severe, though just. All right. Pat smoothed out the map with a toe, and then mounted. Let's be on our way. He took the lead this morning, and Clay watched their approach to the upthrust peaks for some time before intense curiosity, not unmingled with concern, got the better of them. The way you're heading now will land us smack dab in the middle of Schoonover's range, somewhere up the canyon, Stevens, he warned. That's fine, Pat nodded. At least we won't be followed from town into that hornet's nest. He winked at Esther.
The mountains rose here in a ragged wall. They mounted the little lifting flanks towards a rocky gap and entered the pinyons. Later, the spreading spears of the pines shielded them from the heat of the sun and cut off their view. The resinous odor was pungent. Magpies darted screaming through the trees. Farther up they were forced to dismount and lead the horses. There was no trail, unless the wild things were found their way through here. More than once Clay aided the girl past a particularly difficult spot. "No one's ever entered the cache this way before," she panted, smiling. "Well, that's the idea of it," Pat returned. "This time we want it that way." But if they hoped to slip into the wild country beyond without being seen, they were doomed to be disappointed. Topping the long slope, they passed through the shattering gap, exercising considerable care not to slip on the slick rocks, and were gazing down into the wildly beautiful canyon stretched out beyond when a hard voice spoke up, seemingly at their elbow. "Made it, eh? Well, you can turn around and go back," it said flatly. Whirling, they saw a husky young fellow staring at them narrowly through the rocks, a rifle at his hip covering them. Partially concealed as he was, he had waited till they moved past and were caught in the open. "Nonsense, Bart," Esther spoke up sensibly. "We're looking for Father's 7-hook herd, and Mr. Stevens thinks they may be here in the canyon." "So you come in the back door?" "We came the shortest way. It's rather important just now." She told what had happened to her father, and added by way of explanation of her companions that this was one of Mace Shoeover's sons. Bert Shoeover failed to reveal whether her account was news to him or not, and after a pause he stepped forward, looking at her carefully, and was as deliberately examining Pat and Clay. Manifestly he could not decide what to think. "We're all friends of Sam and Ezra, if that makes any difference," Pat told the fellow quietly. "Will they want to see you?" countered Bart dryly. Clay grinned. "I undertake to persuade them they do," he said. Schoonover rasped his unshaven jaw, considered. "Well," he relented only slightly, "if there's anything wrong with this, we can handle the 3 of you." Without more words he turned his back and began to move away. Taking their cue from this, the 3 followed. Descending into the steep-walled canyon on foot, the young frontiersman appeared utterly reckless of life and limb, lunging downward with loose and long-legged strides. They had all they could do to keep up with him, and it was certain that he got them to the bottom in record time. Brushing aside the last pine scrag and sliding his horse down a cut bank behind the others, Pat looked over the wildest and most colorful stretch of canyon it had ever been his fortune to behold. Yellow crags raked the sky in every direction, and he heard the cheerful laughter of a stream over rocky cascades. Mountain blue stem tufted the slope above, and the blue-tinged pine foliage opened out into a spacious paradise for stock. Pat glimpsed a steer, another, and then several in a group, and he spotted a 7-hook brand. "Hey!" Clay sang out excitedly. "There's Sam Sloan up there." They pushed forward, Bart Schoonover striding tirelessly in the lead, and Sam saw someone coming and turned towards them. Catching sight of Pat, he reined up involuntarily, a wholly unaccustomed expression of defiance stealing over his bristly face. Schoonover passed him, hailed someone beyond into the open. But Sam could only see Pat. He waited for the latter to come up, sitting his saddle uneasily, and finding an immense difficulty in meeting the younger man's eye.
"Well, Stevens,"
He was almost huffy, though plainly on the defense.
"I suppose now you'll be telling me that we played hell with things in general?"
"Not much." Pat amazed him with his hearty response. "For once you did exactly right, Sam. Strange as it sounds, your move busted this situation wide open." End of chapter 14.